All right. Welcome all. It's Monday. Ellie Backman, Chabad and College Park. It's my turn to continue this journey through the Rambam. As you've been learning the last couple of parakim, the last couple of chapters, we're going to continue with the ideas of the different carrying and domains that exist on Shabbat, the private, the public, this kind of in-between one, which we call a Carmelite, and then the final, what's called the Makom Pitor, the kind of a place that doesn't exist almost, so therefore you cannot be liable and you're allowed to carry into it. It's a place of exemption, Makom Pitor. So these are the four domains we've been learning about in this chapter 15. We'll continue with a lot of fine details. And when you're standing in one and interacting with the other, which we already began, if a canal kind of runs between them, when you can throw things out of your window, it's a lot of details. It's a little bit on the longer side, slightly complicated. We're going to do the best we can to make our trip through this. And let's go. Perek Tezvav, Halacha Aleph. A person can stand in Rishis Harabim in a public domain, and lean over, so to say, and carry in this Rishis HaYachid. Or if he stands in a Rishis HaYachid, a private, and he reaches into a public, he can carry, because he's walking in one domain, even though his hand seems to be in another one. But the Rambam continues, but he can't carry more than arba amot, because you can't carry more than 4 cubits, because Rishis Harabim in a public, you're not allowed to carry more than 4. So in a sense, what the Rambam is saying is, when the challenge between a private and a public is when you take from one to the other. If you're not taking from one to the other, you're not doing anything, so to say, consequentially wrong here. Now, if you end up carrying it for in the Rishis Harabim, that's a separate conversation, and that's not allowed. The Rambam says, now what happens if you did bring it back to the other domain which you're standing in? Potter, you are not liable, because it's not a normal circumstance that you're standing in a different rishos. So you're not allowed to do it, but you're potter. If you did it, you're not liable. A person could stand in Rishis HaYachid, in a private, and open the door into Rishis Harabim, or the opposite, Rishis Harabim, Rishis HaYachid. In other words, you can put a key in the door and open the door, because in a sense, you're standing in one and only kind of reaching in with the other, and then you're taking the key back out. The Rambam gives another example. An animal that was the majority was outside the domain, was outside the stall, so to say, so it's not in public, if you wish. But his head he leans his head inside. You could force feed it. And it seems that the commentaries seem to apply. What's happening over here is you have to hold the animal. So in some sense, you're holding the head of the animal as you're force feeding it. But then the Rambam says, for a gummel and a camel, you can't do that. His head and part of his body, or majority of the body, is inside. Because he has a long neck, so it kind of separates the head from the body. Otherwise, you're kind of holding the animal, so it's as if there's some connection between the entirety of the animals. The debate in the Gemara, how exactly that is understood. Beis, halacha bet. The second, a person should not stand in a private domain and put his head into the public domain and take a drink. Or vice versa. Stand in public, reach his head in and drink in a private. The Rambam says only if he leans in his head, a majority of his body, into the place where he's drinking. So you can't just stick your head in, you got to stick your head on a good part of your body. The Rambam says, what are we talking about? This only applies if you're drinking in very fancy vessels that you need. Why? There's a gezerah where I have a decree that maybe you'll take them, and then you'll be carrying the dishes, the vessels, between the two different domains. If there was a disposable, then he doesn't need them anymore. Or he was drinking from a pit that's not in a public or private domain, but it's in this domain we call it Carmelin. Then even if they're nice vessels, he can then just stick his head in and drink. So in other words, the concern here is not just on you drinking, taking the water from one to the other. The concern is that you're holding a nice cup, and you may take the cup back out of normal thought process. I want to hold on to the cup. You take it back. That's a problem. So the Rambam says if you create a situation where that's not the issue, either it's a disposable cup, you don't care to drop it, so to say, where you are, or we're dealing with a carmelite, which doesn't have the same liability issue as a public and private domain carrying between the situation, then you would be allowed to. Gimel, number 3. Omid adam mishisarabim v'kolid mina aver. If someone walks, he's standing in Shisarabim, and there's in the public domain, and there's this water pipe going that springs a leak, and it's springing a geyser, if you wish, right? Or it's coming out of the wall, out of a hole in the wall. But the bottom line is the water is now in the air. Shosa, and he drinks. He's allowed to do that. But he's not allowed to touch, so to say, the wall or the drain pipe and when he's drinking. In other words, right when it's in the air, the Rambam says that's okay to drink from. But if you're interacting with it, then you're dealing with what might be a private into the public where you're standing. But what happens if you did touch? So if the place, the drain pipe, the gutter, wherever the water is coming from, is higher than 10 tefachim, higher than 10 handbreadths, and it's less than 3 handbreadths from the roof, so the gutter which is attached to the roof, let's say, hareza osher is forbidden. Because when anything within 3, we learned this concept of lavud, that if it's within 3, it's considered part of the house. If it's part of the house, it's like you're literally taking from the private to drink it in the public, and that's forbidden. The Rambam says something similar if this drain pipe had on it 4x4 handbreadths, whether it was lower than 10 or higher than 10, what happens? What happens here is since it's 4x4, the pipe becomes considered its own domain. And now we're taking from a separate domain into the public domain. So we don't need to look anymore. Is it close to the house? Is it not close to the house? It by itself is considered a domain, and we can't take from that private into the public where you're standing. Or perhaps it may be a carmelite even, but we're not allowed to take one from the other. So why are you forbidden to do this, but you're not liable? The Rambam says ultimately you can't be liable for carrying from one domain to the next because the water is in a constant flow. Since the water is in a constant flow, you never lifted it up and put it down. If you remember, we looked, you have to have what's called the akira and hanacha. You have to lift it up and put it back down. You don't have that here because the water is flowing. But still, you're not allowed to do it because it's too similar to taking from one domain to the next domain. Daled. Now we're going to talk about the rules of something that sticks out of the wall of your house, which is kind of like a shelf that comes out, if you wish. It's called a ziv. A ziv is like a projection of some sort, a little shelf. So the Rambam starts, ziv shalifte achaloin yoytzer ba'aver she'al rishis harabim. So this little shelf sticks out over the rishis harabim, over the public. If it's higher than 10 handbreadth, 10 tefachim, you're allowed to use it. In other words, you can open your window and put something on it and take something off of it. Why? The height of Rishis Harabim stops at 10 and never goes higher. The air above 10 will never be considered a Rishis Harabim. So therefore, it's not putting from the private into the public. And therefore, in a normal situation, you could have these projection, these shelves coming out as long as they're higher than 10. The entire wall higher than 10 you can use. Under 10, that's a problem, because that could be a public domain. The Rambam continues to qualify this. When does this apply? When there is one projection, one shelf going out of your wall. But if there are two of these projections going out, one above the other. So now what happens? Both of them are higher than 10 handbreadths. Rambam just told you higher than 10 handbreadths, higher than it's not in public, you could use it. Here the Rambam is saying you cannot use this. Why? If the projection in front of the window, the shelf that's in front of the window is 4x4, then you're not allowed to use it. Because once anything is considered 4x4, it takes on a quality of its own domain. And the projection below which it's 4x4 is its own domain. So they prohibit each other. They cancel each other out. Why? You can't have two kind of domains on top of each other within one domain. So here the domain is kind of open, and now suddenly you have one domain, one projection, one shelf, and the next domain. Since they're 4x4, they become their own domain, and therefore they cancel each other out. You can't use either of them. Just one of them, higher than 10, would have been fine. Vav, the Rambam continues explaining this. What if the higher one does not have 4x4? And the bottom one also doesn't have 4x4. Then you can utilize both of their space, the space on the shelf, because neither of them has become a domain for itself. And you can use the entire wall until the bottom 10 again. The bottom 10 becomes the public. Higher than that, because there's no separate domain in these projections, you can continue to use most of them and the wall. Now the Rambam still continues on this. What if the lower of these two shelves has 4x4, but the higher one does not have 4x4? Then the higher one, right, it doesn't have 4, so seemingly it should be allowed to be used. So the Rambam says no, you can only use it next to your window. But so let's say the window was 3 tfachim wide, and the shelf is 6 tfachim. So you have 3 in front of the window, and then 1.5 on each side. So the Rambam says the one in front of the window becomes part of the window, and therefore you can use it. The one on the sides are wanting to become their own kind of projection of shelves, and that already, because the one below it is an issue, and therefore you can't use it because the one below has 4x4. So again, these are all circumstances rather that the Rambam is trying to define to help us understand what and how to apply to situations. Although many of these situations may not necessarily apply in situations that we deal with. The Rambam continues talking here about this idea. Zayin 7. Any projection, any shelf that comes out that we're talking about, when we say you're allowed to use it. Fascinating insight. The Rambam says, I just told you that certain times the shelf that comes out of the wall by your window, you're allowed to use, even though seemingly it's above the public. But because it's higher than 10, and it's not 4x4, etc., all the details we spoke about, you can use it. You can only use it for, you cannot, rather, let's start the sentence differently. You cannot use or put on it something which is made out of glass or clay or china. Why? Rather, I'm sorry, I read the sentence wrong. As I started to say the first time, you can only use it's a double negative in the Rambam. You can't use it except for clay or glass. Why? Because if they fall down into the street below, they're going to break. But if it's a garment or food, also you're not allowed to put it on the shelf. Because then if they do fall into the public, you're going to run downstairs and pick it up and bring it into your house. And that's a problem, because then you're literally taking from a public into a private. So we want to make sure that you don't find yourself in that situation. So therefore, only something which you know that if it falls, it will break. I'm therefore going to never worry about it if it falls. I'm not going to go pick it up. And that you can do there. Ches. Now we're going to change from these projections and shelves, and we're going to start talking in the sense about two houses which are next to each other, throwing from one to the other, and then we're going to continue with our concept of interacting with things as well. Ches, number 8. There are two houses on two different sides of Rishus Harabim. If you throw above 10, remember Rishus Harabim ends at 10, so I'm now throwing above the Rishus Harabim from one to the other. I'm potter. I'm not allowed to, but I'm not liable. Either they both have to be yours, or there has to be some eruv connection between them. Eruv is not the carrying eruv necessarily, but the eruv that creates the situation between 2 or 3 or 4 private domains to become one, which we're going to learn a lot more about in detail when we go to Hilchos Eruv. And there are two parts of when we talk about an eruv in this community. One is the fence or the string, which says this is a private domain. But now if I have 5 houses within it, I have to somehow join them as one so they will all become one big private domain. As I said, we're going to learn more about that now later on in Hilchos Eruv, and not right now. But in any event, between these two houses, you had the ability to carry because they're both yours or because you made such an eruv between them. And you can throw anything, even things that if they fall below, they won't break. But if one house or one window, so to say, was not level with the other window, then then you can't throw it across because there's a better chance you're going to miss. If you're going to miss, it's going to fall down. If it's going to fall down, you're going to pick it up and bring it back from the public inside to the private, and that's a problem. But things which will break, like clay, earthenware, glass, that you can throw, because if it falls and it breaks, you're not going to worry about bringing it back in because it's going to be garbage. So the bottom line there, Rambam says, if you're a good shot and you have a straight shot, then you can throw anything. If it's not a good, easy shot, then only throw something that if it falls, you will not go to bring it inside. Tess. Now we're going to talk about a bar, is a pit or a cistern of water. So there's this pit of water, this well reservoir of water inside a public domain. And there's a window above it. There's an opening in the helm above it. So the pit, the depth of the pit, together with the sand pile around it, seems like they must have had some aspect of sand around it, easy to block it off, maybe so people shouldn't fall, or just as they dug it out, they put it around the sign. So you have the depth and the sand above it. Both of them will be included in the measurement to see if it reaches 10. And if it does reach 10, then you can carry in Shabbos. So if it's a 5 tefach deep pit and a 5 tefach high pile of sand, it equals 10. You can use it because it becomes a rishus b'fnei atzma, its own private domain. So you're taking from a private domain to a private domain. That's okay. So now the Rambam qualifies it a step further, that it has to be next to the wall, within our bar tvachim, 4 handbreadths next to the wall of the house. Because then people won't walk there, so it's not considered a pathway of the public domain. But if it was further away from the wall, then you cannot take water out of it into the house. Unless the sand pile around it was 10 tvachim by itself. Because as we said before, Rishus Harabim is going to end at 10. So here you're lifting up the bucket within it, so and it goes from the floor to Rishus Harabim through the sand for 10. So when it finally leaves the sand, it's leaving Rishus Harabim. It's in what we call the Makom Patur. It's in this no-name kind of domain, which is not liable for anything. But if it's less than 10, then when you lift it up, you're still in the public. And then you go from the public to the private, that would be a problem. Good. Now the Rambam talks about the reverse, kind of dumping something out of your house. Ashma b'shis harabim kavayasar. If there's a pile of garbage, a 10 tefachim high pile of garbage outside your house, v'chaloin al kapo, and you have a window above it, sheivchim l'mayim b'Shabbos. You can pour water onto it on Shabbos. When does this apply? If it's a public garbage pile, not your private garbage pile. She'ain darkel lispana is because it wasn't the custom to clean it up. In other words, this becomes a garbage dump. Everyone dumps there. So since everyone dumps there, it's going to always be there. But if it's an individual person outside their house, and let's say they're doing construction at a pile of garbage, then you cannot pour from the house onto that. Why? Shema tispanem. Maybe they will have cleaned it up when you weren't paying attention. So then you're pouring out of your private directly into the public. So again, the garbage pile by itself calls and classifies as a separate domain because it's 10 tefachim high. So the Rambam says that would be fine. You can pour into that because it's private to private. The challenge is that if it's not a big garbage dump that always is there, somebody might clean it up. And then when you're not paying attention, you pour from the private directly into the public. That would be a problem. Yud Aleph. The next couple of halachas are going to be talking about a conduit of water, or a kind of a stream, not really a stream, but a water pipe and a stream of water that goes through a chatzir, goes through your courtyard. And there's a number of halachas and applications of this. Yud Aleph, 11. Amas hamayim she'aves b'chatzir is this water conduit that goes through a courtyard. If this conduit was 10 tefachim high and wide 4, oh yes, okay, not amos, wider even up to 10, then it's okay to use. As then you can't use it, even though it's considered a private, a separate domain, because it's 10 by 4, up to 10, unless you made a wall around it. A wall around it means in the water. The Rambam is soon going to explain what does that mean to make a wall in water. So hang tight with that. But the bottom line is you need to make some kind of distinction of this thing is a private thing into what it is. The Rambam continues, and if it's not 10 high or 4 wide, and then it's not considered a domain on its own, so what happens to it? It's now considered part of the courtyard. Part of the courtyard you can definitely take out of, because it's just like carrying in a courtyard, which you're allowed to do. It doesn't call for itself its own name. The Rambam continues, 12, yes, to Master Amos, if it was wider than 10 amos wide, even though it's not higher than 10 tfachim high, it's a very wide but not tall. You cannot take the water out of there until you make another partition, a wall, some sort. Because anything that's wider than 10 will break the walls of the courtyard. In other words, if I have a wall around the courtyard and there's a gap in the wall that's wider than 10 amos, the Rambam says your wall is no longer considered a wall because it has this massive doorway in the middle of it. If it's less than 10 amos, the Rambam says it's like a little hole in the wall. Every wall's going to have some hole. That's fine. It's a doorway. It's a this. It's a that. It's fine. But if you get wider. So here, if this conduit of water is wider than 10, it suddenly is considered a break in the doorway. And therefore, the walls, rather, around the chatzir, around the entire courtyard, so you can't carry there any longer. Now the Rambam explains something else here about this scenario. So what happens to the entire courtyard? I just told you that you have a break in your wall. Can you carry in your courtyard? It's and the Rambam says that if on either side of the wall, right, so this water rushes through the wall off to the ocean, to the sea, rather, to wherever it's going. And if it's 10 amos wide, as long as you have a pasbikan or pasbikan, somewhat of a wall left on either side of the opening in the courtyard gates, or even on one side, but then it's at least dalet tfachim, 4 handbreadths wide, then you can continue carrying in the entire courtyard. In other words, we've limited, or we've lessened rather, decreased the size of the break in the wall by having something on either side, or at least 4 tefachim on one side, so the walls of the courtyard are still good to carry into courtyard, but therefore ein asr l'malis min ha'abel bavad. And then you can the only part that it doesn't fix is the actual water conduit. You can't take water from the conduit, but you can still continue to carry in the courtyard. But if the conduit goes through the wall and it's more than 10 amos and there's no pasmikan, there's no wall or something left on either side, also then it's forbidden to carry an entire courtyard because now the conduit has opened up your wall into the yam. Yam is the sea, which is a Carmelis. So suddenly you don't have a wall over there, you have an opening to a Carmelis. That makes the entire courtyard have an issue, and therefore you can no longer carry in the entire courtyard. So Rambam in 13 continues, how do you put a wall, a partition in the water? If the wall you make is sort of on top of the water, you're creating some kind of wall that sits on top of the water like a bridge, then it needs to have at least 1 tefach into the water. 1 handbreadth of this wall must go into the water. And on the reverse, and if you drop the entire wall into the water, then you need to have at least 1 handbreadth, 1 tefach, going above the water, in order that the water that's in the conduit should be separate from the other side of the courtyard. In other words, you have to make some level of distinction. So it has to be visible either slightly above or slightly below to make sure you know the distinction starts in the water at this point. You don't have to make completely above and below. You can either or, but it has to go at least 1 handbreadth into the other side, either above or below. And the Rambam continues, even though this mechitza, this partition, does not actually touch the ground, and we've always said till now that a wall has to go at least within 3 tefachim of the ground. Here the Rambam is saying it doesn't need to. It could be above the water with 1 tefach into the water, is clearly not going to the ground. Since it has 10 tefachim in the height of the wall above, let's say there's 9 above and 1 in the water, that's fine. It has 10. And this type of a wall that doesn't go all the way touching the ground or within 3 of the ground, but rather is hanging in midair, is only going to make permissible water. Because the entire concept of carrying water is only forbidden from the chachamim, from the rabbis, and therefore they were able to do this. They were lenient in the partition, because the whole reason for it is to make a heker, is to make a sign of the separation between the two. Okay, now we're going to continue. If it goes between several courtyards, this is when it goes between 1 courtyard. Now, what if this conduit of water goes between several? Yudalid. This conduit of water goes between several courtyards. And there are openings from the different courtyards into the conduit of water. If it doesn't have the size to make it a separate domain, which is, in other words, 10 by 4, like we've been saying till now, 10 by 4 creates its own domain. So if it's not 10 by 4, then you could go ahead and lower the basket and take the water, and it's only considered like a Carmelis, and it's only considered like this middle ground, and it would be okay to do so. But the Rambam says it qualifies this. When it's not distanced and removed from the wall of the house, 3 tefachim. But if it was more than 3 tefachim away from the wall, so then you're not allowed to take from it. Unless there were kind of say beams sticking out from the wall, these projection ideas that are coming out from the wall over the water, because then it seems like it's passing through the chutzner under these projections. So 3 tefachim to the wall makes it like part of the house in a certain sense, and then where you can do it. If it's not 3, if it's further than 3 distance from the wall, then you need these beams coming out, these projections to kind of make it work. Now the Rambam continues with something called a balcony, a porch that sticks over. If you had a balcony that comes out of your house and it goes over the yam, over the sea, over the body of water, and it has a hole in the bottom where you can reach down and pick up your bucket. You're not allowed to, the Rambam says, reach down and take water up on Shabbos. Unless you made walls above the water equal to the below the window, or if below the porch you built hanging walls that came down around the aperture of the window coming down, then we look as if it comes down and touches the water, and therefore you're allowed to take the bucket up through that kind of contraption which you created with some sort of walls. And as the Rambam continues, and just like you're allowed to take up from the water of the sea through this built walled contraption, you're also allowed to pour out from the house through that back to the sea. Because it pours out onto the carmelis, and these walls create enough of a separation. Okay, Tez Zayin. The Rambam continues. Now, a courtyard which is less than 4 by 4, and you're not allowed to pour water into this kind of a courtyard, even though seemingly a courtyard you're allowed to pour into your courtyard, but here you're not allowed to, because they would go directly into the public domain. Your private domain is so small, the Rambam saying, that as you pour the bucket into your courtyard, it automatically was as if you're pouring it directly into the public domain right outside your private domain. Therefore, you have to make a pit that contains sasayim is 2 saw, a measurement. Some say it's like 8.2 liters each saw, so it'll be 16.5 liters, etc. So you have to make somewhere a pit that the water pours into this pit. And you have to kind of create a cover on the top of it. You shouldn't see the pit. So in other words, what the Rambam is going to be talking about as we continue these laws is when I'm seemingly not doing a direct act. It's called koichai, my one step removed from the act. I'm pouring into my courtyard. I could be allowed to. But since it's so small that it's automatically going to go to Shisarabim, to the public, that's a problem. But if I create a pit that will capture the water. So like, I guess what I think they call it a dry well, where you have your water gutters and all the rest run off, and it holds the water before it comes back onto your property and eventually soaks into the ground. So that would be a different kind of conversation, because then you're not pouring it directly into the Shisaram, and you're pouring it into the pit. And when you're counting the size of the courtyard to see if it's this 4 by 4, as the Rambam saying, if it's less than that, you can't do this. You can count your patio, you can count the courtyard, you can count it all, the Rambam says. Practically, the Rambam says you need a pit that will hold the amount of 2 saw of water. How big is that? It's a half an amma by a half an amma in the depths of 3/5 of an amma. An amma is about 1.5 feet, so you can do the math if you wish. So once it's that size, you can pour. Now the Rambam gives another interesting idea here. What if I made something that was smaller than that? It could only hold 1 saw of water. So instead of making it a half an amma by half an amma, I made it 1/4 of an amma by 1/4 of an amma. The Rambam says, then you can only pour as much water as will fill into the pit, but not spill over. But if it was this original size of 2 saw of water, Then Shevchel Afil Shishim Sal Shamayim. Then you can pour as much as you want. It doesn't matter, the Rambam says. And even though the water was, of course, going to spill out. If it holds 2 and I pour 60, 58 are going to come flying out of there. The Rambam says that's okay. If I make it less than 2, I could only put in the quality, the quantity of what it holds. Why? The Rambam says, when does this above apply that I can pour this 60 into the 2? But in the winter time. Now, winter time, in the way the Gemara references in the Rambam, is not winter. It's called the rainy season, because in the Middle East, there wasn't such a winter to begin with. So during the rainy season, because all the ground is muddy already, and the pipes are naturally pouring out water because there's a lot of rain. They can't hold them. So there's always water flowing all over the place. So anybody looking and sees you pouring into 60, sees water all over the place, says, well, that's the rainy season. There's water all over the place. It's not him pouring water deliberately to get it into the public. But during the sunny season, and if it holds 2, so as we said before in Shevkin, but during the sunny season, if it holds 2, then you actually can only pour into. If it's less than that, you can't pour. So in other words, the concept that once you have 2, you can pour up to 60, or less than 2, you can't, only applies in the rainy season, because the water is naturally going to be all over the place, and therefore your water is not necessarily being seen to do something. But during the dry season, then the Rambam says you can only pour what it actually holds. If it holds 2, you can't pour 60 anymore. And if it holds less, for sure not. You can't pour anything because it's going to naturally go all over the place in the dry season, and everyone's going to realize you're pouring it into the public. Yudches, continue with a similar kind of idea. A bib, sheshevchin lemayim. This is kind of a drain that you pour water into. And it's an underground pipe that you pour your water into your drain, and your sewage pipe takes it away underground, and then it pours it out in the public. So it's not above the ground where people could see it. It's all underground. And also a gutter that you kind of pour water into the top, and then the water flows down the wall like a gutter. In other words, if you open up your second-story window and pour water into your gutter, and then it kind of comes down the drain pipe and out into the public. Even if down the wall was 100 amma, or down the underground pipe out to the public was 100 amma, you're not allowed to pour into this drain pipe, or into the drain pipe, or into the sewer, into the drain gutter. Why? Because your koyach, your act, is automatically directly pouring. We don't care how long it is. It's your water that you're pouring that goes straight out. So you have to pour it kind of around the outside of the drain, and then if it kind of makes its way into the drain and goes, it's not your direct action. Again, your direct action would be an issue, but if it's not your direct action, then we can have a different conversation. Your test, 19, the Rambam qualifies this. But when do we say this? This applies in the sunny season. Sorry. But in the rainy season, you could pour and pour again, repeat, and not have any problem. Because the average gutter is pouring out water. The average drain is pouring out water because it's the rainy season and there's always water going. In a certain sense, the person doesn't mind that the water spills out right there in his yard because it's all muddy, it's all wet. So it's no difference. It's not like I'm deliberately trying to get it out of my property. It's not going to make a difference. My property's all muddy and wet anyways. In general, if you're going to pour, the Rambam says, different than the public, but it's the water lets out into the Carmelis, which is a not public, not private domain. It's allowed. And even in the sunny season. Why? Why is the Carmelis different than the public here? Because this concept of your action. In other words, not what you're doing, but what's happening because of your action. We did not make that decree in Carmel. So in a certain sense, the reason I'm not allowed to do something which my action will lead for something to happen, because we're concerned that that was going to allow you to do it directly, and that's not allowed. But by a Carmelist is already a step away. The whole Carmelist is to make sure I don't do it in public. And now this to make sure I don't do it another step. So it's a step to a step. So that we're not concerned about. In Geisrin Gezerah LeGezerah, we don't make one decree on top of another decree. And therefore the Rambam says a Carmelist, you're allowed to pour it directly. Therefore the Rambam says if you're in a boat and you're traveling, you have water and it has to go out, you're allowed to pour it on the wall of the side of the ship, even though it's going to go into the Yam, into the sea. Because the sea is a Carmelist. And therefore, you're doing is not a problem. You're not pouring it directly into the sea. That would be one action. But you're pouring it onto the wall. Even though you know it's going to slide on the wall, that's one action to another action. That's okay. Chav. Once we're talking about a boat already, the Rambam continues. You should not fill up water from a svina. In other words, don't lower a basket into the water and bring it up to the boat. Unless you've made a shelf, a porch come off the top of the boat, which is 4x4. When is this talking about? When does this apply? When you're within 10 of the water. Remember, within 10 of the water, Rishis Harabim goes up to 10. A Carmelist can also only go up to 10. So within 10, I have a challenge. So I have to make a separate kind of 4x4 projection, shelves, porch to do it on. But if I was higher than 10 handbreadth, then you just take out any projection. Put out one board. It doesn't have to be 4x4 to create its own entity. It can even be one board that you use on to lift up and down on. Why? Because now when you're actually taking it from the water, which is a Carmelist, you bring it up above 10, which is a Makom B'Torah, a non-liable place. And then from the non-liable place, I'm bringing it to the boat, which is my private domain. And the only reason we have the thing sticking out at all is to kind of make a necessary distinction, just so we should remember this idea of Makom B'Torah, etc. But technically, the problem is not in the carrying, the problem is just in making sure we remember. Now we're done with those questions. We're going to go to something that might be was more practical in those days when you were reading a scroll. You didn't have a book, you had a scroll. Chaval, Sefer Carmelist. You're reading a scroll sitting in a Carmelist. When it's galgal on mixas hasefer l'shis harabim mixas b'yadei, and you dropped one side by accident, and it rolls into the public domain. So you're holding one side of the scroll, and it's unraveled itself, and the other side sitting inside the public. If it went 4 amos inside the public, you're not allowed to carry 4 inside the public. So turn it over, the Rambam says, leave it face down, and leave it alone till after Shabbos. Because we're concerned that the next time, if we let you reel it back in, so to say, roll it back in, the next time you might drop both ends and then go take it also, and then you're carrying 4 amos in a Shisarabim inside the public. If it rolls less than 4 cubits into the public domain, you can roll it back to yourself. If you're sitting in a Carmelist and the same thing happens and it rolls into Rishis HaYachid, now again, the 4 amos did not apply in Rishis HaYachid, so just the mere fact it rolled and unraveled into the private domain, you could roll it back up. It's not quite a carry, and you can bring it back in that fashion. Now the Rambam said, but if you're sitting and reading this scroll in a Rishis HaYachid and this galgal Rishis HaRabim, and now it rolls into the public, if it stops and it comes to rest, or you drop one side, it rolls out, unravels, and stops its roll in the middle of the public. You're in the private. It's in the public now. Turn it over on the print, I guess, is a matter of respect. You leave the print and walk away. And if it did not stop, but you're yanking it and it's kind of holding it, didn't unroll that much, and it's hanging in the air inside the public. You're in the private, it's hanging there in the public. The Rambam says, in that case, as long as it didn't touch the ground, you could roll it back into you. Because it's a strange scenario, so we don't make the carrying aspect apply here. Chof Beis. Now we're going to go into a little bit something else of carrying for the final halacha, final law here. If somebody sees a thorn in the public domain, he's scared that people are going to walk in there, they're going to get splintered, they're going to get stuck by it, it's going to hurt them. So he wants to pick it up. So he could carry it less 4 amos. In other words, you can't carry it 4 amos inches around them. And normally we tell you you're not allowed to carry even less because we're concerned you're going to carry 4. Here the Rambam says you can carry less than 4 at a time because you're doing it not to harm, the people should not be harmed. And if it was in a carmelis, so normally we say in a carmelis that you should also not carry 4 out of comparing it to the public. But here, in this case, because you're doing it not to hurt someone, you can pick it up and carry it even 100 amos straight. You don't have to do this starting and stopping, and under 4. V'chein meis, Rambam says another situation. A person passes away on a Friday night. Shehistriach and is beginning now to smell, to decompose. V'nizvazi yesmidai, and the odors, it's bad. It's becoming very disrespectful or abhorrent, if you wish, distasteful for the people around there. But and the neighbors, the people who live there can't last. The smell of the corpse is too bad. You can carry it from this private domain, the home where this dead body, the deceased body is found, into a carmelis outside of the home, into a carmelis, not to public, but into this carmelis. Here's another case. If somebody goes ahead and wants to wash himself in the sea. Now, we don't generally wash ourselves on Shabbos. We'll learn the halachas of rechitza, of washing, as we go later on. But it's a case where the person went into the water. Perhaps he's going to the mikveh, etc. When he comes up, he should dry himself off as he comes out. So as you get out of the water, if you wish, dry yourself off. Because if not, you're going to come out of the water, or as you start walking in the water, which is a carmelis, you're now going to carry the water on you for 4 amos as you walked out 4 amos. Different than rain. Rain you can't help yourself with, number 1. Number 2, commentators say rain is not so much water on you. It's kind of, sometimes it's more water, sometimes less water. But here you're coming up, and as you come up, there's a lot of water that's kind of held onto you. So the Rambam says, dry yourself before you start moving, so you should not be carrying Dalet amos in this carmelis at the time. And with that, we finished chapter 15.